Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
Just binge listen to the Battersea Poltergeist and the Uncanny podcasts and need my spooky fix. A lot of ghost stories on Reddit are very Americanized, and shows like Most Haunted or Ghost Dimension are way too cheesy. The real stories, from the people who have experienced them, are much more insightful. The UK has such an old, bloody, turbulent history. Tell me about your brushes with the paranormal. Tell me your ghost story. Nothing scary and frightening, really, just sighting. When I was staying at my then girlfriend's house, now wife, I was home alone and saw two people walking down the path to the rear garden. I went out the back to see what they wanted, and they walked through the bush and vanished. I would see the couple every Saturday at lunchtime, but for fear of seeming crazy didn't say anything to the GF. Then one day I saw it again and the dad just said, "Hi." I looked at him and asked, "You can see them as well?" He said yes and said he was surprised that if I saw them that I didn't bring it up before. He asked me to write a description of what I saw and what he saw to confirm we saw the same thing, and then explained that they were a couple that lived over the road before the house was built, and sometimes you see them going the other direction but never see the figures on the other side on the bush.
Years ago, I stayed in holiday accommodation that was on the upper floor in the wing of a big old house in the middle of nowhere. There were only 3 of us, my mom, my boyfriend, now husband, and myself, and only we had access to that floor. At around 4 a.m. on the second night of being there, I woke up to these heavy, deliberate footsteps, like someone with hobnail boots, coming down the hallway, then stopping dead outside our bedroom door. At first I thought that maybe my boyfriend had up to pee in the middle of the night, but when I checked he was still asleep beside me. I never fell back asleep, and the footsteps didn't go away, but there was no sign anyone had been there when I got up a few hours later. Over breakfast, my mom asked, "Did either of you come into my room last night?" Turns out she'd woken up during the night to the sensation of someone moving around her room, then sitting down on her bed. She tried to turn around to see who it was, but could only turn her head and could see a bit of an outline of a person sitting there. I suppose these could be explained as sleep phenomena, although I was fully awake and terrified, and was able to reach over to my boyfriend, but it was odd how these things happened to both of us in different rooms on the same night. For what it's worth, it didn't happen again during our stay. And a small bonus one, my mom's partner used to live in a flat that was part of an old, converted house. There was a sort of wisp of smoke that would periodically appear in the same spot in one of the communal areas with no apparent cause. It was quite a high-traffic area, but when the smoke was there it wouldn't be disturbed by people moving through it. It would just sort of hang there. Always kind of wondered what the deal was with that.
Worked in the oldest pub in my town. Mists, bells ringing, voices and things moving out of the corner of your eye were commonplace, but one Friday night about 2 a.m. after we had closed and the gaffer had made us a meal, there was an almighty crash from downstairs. It alarmed us all so badly, we armed ourselves with pointy things and anything to hand as we genuinely thought someone was breaking in. The only thing I can liken it to was someone dropping an entire glass washer basket full of glasses on the floor. Anyway, when we got downstairs, there was nothing to be seen, apart from a single pint of glass, intact, rolling around its own axis in a circle on the floor in front of us. Crazy thing was it didn't stop spinning. We all made our excuses and left the meal. Loads of crazy shit happened there, which I'm now remembering. Was chatting to the landlord extremely late at night, only the 2 of us there, and the bell rang in the other bar. Night. The landlord and his partner were asleep one night and apparently woke up to a massive bang. When the light went on, nothing was wrong, turned the light off, another massive bang, light went on and the wardrobe was upside down. There was a room off to the side of the main cellar, which literally nobody would go in. I've seen 6'5" blokes full of bravado saying it's easy, then 5 minutes later in tears saying they don't want to do it. Nobody ever saw anything in there or even around there, but you just didn't want to go in. Very odd feeling. The pub dog just growled and barked any time you took it down the cellar. Literally every bit of paranormal activity stopped the night the then landlord bought his new baby son home. Never to return. Night lady. I worked at a 240-plus-year-old pub and in near Stowe, Vermont. I lived in an 1870 home within walking distance of the pub and have several stories that relate to the pub and my house. Shit, just in the 17 years that I worked there it was called the Bucket, the Hungry Lion, Smuggler's Notch Inn, and the Tavern. I was on the fence about belief in the paranormal until I began working there. Within the first week of starting there, I was 12 years old and washing the dishes. 2 of the older servers were telling me about the innkeeper who died here and haunts the place. The housekeeping lady Fina, who spoke very broken English, came in on one of these conversations and said, "Yes, we have ghost, but it's nice ghost." I ask one of the other dishwashers who goes to my high school if they are messing with me, and he begins telling me of his experiences. I could sit here and tell ghost stories for hours based on ones that were shared with me in that building, but I'm going to stick to the experiences I was there for. Dead serious, I have goosebumps head to toe just remembering a few of the things from over the years of working there. Full body apparitions, things moving around, the last person locking up at night being lured into the attic by sounds only to have the lights go out when people get up there. Many experiences over the years. In fact, most of the women/server refused to lock up at night and be alone in the building. After nearly a year of working there, I was upstairs putting on my kitchen uniform when I saw what I assumed to be my own shadow on a wall. When I saw it cock its head and walk away, I sprinted downstairs only to be laughed at when I could barely speak trying to tell the other staff. The all-time most frightening thing that ever happened there was related to this one waitress who had worked there for several years and was already frightened of the place despite not having had any of her own experiences. She would always pay me $5 to go upstairs late at night and do her cash drop in the safe. She was scared enough to trust a teenager with hundreds of dollars every night, but I was a trustworthy kid, and she was good to me there. One day, after about 10 years of working together, I was still working there a few nights a week while attending college. This particular server was there to get her paycheck in the front office on her day off. I was there early because I opened and ran the kitchen all afternoon on Sundays. I will never forget talking to the owner and let's say Kay in the front office, which was connected to the main living fireplace room of the original inn. During the conversation we begin to hear Kay's 2-year-old daughter chatting away playing in the next room over. Then we started hearing her yell, "No bad." All 3 of us walk in and see her sitting on a couch staring at an antique rocking chair saying in a ridiculously cute kid voice, "Yes, no, okay," and Kay asks the toddler who she was talking to and she very matter-of-factly said that she was talking to the Halloweens. "I'm talking to the Halloweens, mommy, the ghost people who live here." Kay grabbed her daughter and said, "We have to go now," and she ran out the front door. She left her paycheck on the desk and didn't return it for a couple of days. If I was shaking, she must have been mortified for her daughter. There was also this other time where 2 of my good friends that I met working there all met up with me for a canoe camping trip on an island with no cell service in Versus. We were all out there drinking the night away around the campfire and we began telling each other ghost stories from our workplace of many years. I heard more untold stories from those 2 men that night. One of them managed the bar for nearly 20 years, so 5 nights a week he was closing up, and the other man had managed the kitchen, so he was also often alone in the building late and early. Both men shared the same exact story of being lured into the attic by boots stomping from one end to the other and being managers went up to kick out the roaming guest or bar patron only to get up to the top of the stairs and have the light switch turn off. It terrified me that both men shared almost word for word the same experience. The kitchen manager said that he and several others saw a woman dressed in an elegant white dress in the large mirror over the hearth several times. There have been too many thousands of weddings in that building's function hall to remember. Basically, one every week all summer long. I will end it with a funny one to lighten the tone. I was opening one day and heard the bar alarm downstairs go off. I creep down there and hear someone walking around when I know that I ought to be alone in the building. I go down there and see a man who made himself a fruit platter out of the garnishes and was pouring draft beer. He proudly announced that it's okay, I'm friends with the owner. About 15 minutes later I was upstairs preparing for the night in the kitchen and the owner arrived. I made sure to mention his close friend pouring beer and making himself at home in the basement bar. He went down there and got the same announcement that all was okay because he was a dear friend of the owner. Owner says, "You don't know him that well." He pulled the bat from behind the bar and being a serious and not small individual, he got the guy to cough up $40 for renting the space during his time there. Boss had him cornered with a bat and a phone and said pay or the coppers are coming. The man paid his way and probably felt validated for stealing beer and buying his way out of it. I used to get the creeps in my parents' house, really old, with lots of dark corners, and they had a National Trust look to furnish and decorate it. This is just the prelim to cover how much of a wimp I was. Late one evening when I was still at home I was washing up a few bits in the sink, which was under a window with no curtains, lights on low in this warm little farmhouse kitchen. I looked up to put a mug down, and saw my reflection in the dark window, and a woman standing at the door to the cellar behind me on the other side of the room. I screamed, dropped the mug and then all the lights went out. Power cut. Family descends from all corners of the house, finding me on the floor screaming my head off. There was an apron hanging on the door at about the same place I saw the women, so that's what my brain turned into a person. I've experienced something that I can't explain. I used to work in an exceedingly small pharmacy and our stockroom was in the basement. It was a long rectangular room with tall shelves off the side creating an aisle. About halfway down there was a break in the shelves and you could walk through into a second room. We nicknamed this room, the dungeon. It had a couple of steps up into it and a low ceiling so it was pretty tiny and there was a step ladder in the far corner with a trap door which opened up behind the till on the shop floor. This was the first escape if you were downstairs. I was in the basement and looked up to see a guy walking through the gap in the shelves into the dungeon. Nothing seemed particularly off apart from not knowing why he was there. He was blonde, wearing dungarees and a blue and white checked shirt, just looked normal really. I called out to see what he was doing but he ignored me. Rude as. I went into the dungeon after him and he was already gone, presumably up through the trapdoor. I went back upstairs and asked the only other person working there, a locum pharmacist so only there that one day, who the guy was but they didn't have a clue what I was talking about and swore no one had come in the shop and certainly no one had come through the trapdoor. We even watched the cameras covering the shop floor back to check and no one apart from the two of us had been in at that time. Weird as hell. Jump ahead a year and we've got a Saturday girl. She came running up the stairs from the basement one day almost in tears saying that the man had scared her. I asked who she was talking about, and she described a blonde guy in dungarees and a blue and white shirt who'd walked through from the basement to the dungeon, ignored her calling to them and then disappeared after going into the dungeon. I mean WTF is that? She refused to go down there on her own after that, so I had to spend time down there instead. Never saw the guy again but quite regularly found stacked boxes strewn across the floor and things that had been neatly put away on shelves thrown around. It was so weird. I'm really not one to run around shouting, ghosts are real, but I've never been able to figure out WTF happened here. Around 2006 I was a medical student doing a placement at the Royal Infirmary of Glasgow and a popular ghost story used to be told there. It's probably been told for years, and I certainly wouldn't have been the first to hear it or to retell it. There's a corridor that links the old building to the new building and it's at least a mile long, cold, and dimly lit. If you had a cardiac arrest in the old building and were in the new building, you'd have to run down that mile-long corridor as fast as you can. The story goes that a cardiac arrest occurs in the old building and the junior doctor bolts down the linked corridor in that direction. As he rounds the corner wondering which way to go, a patient he passes points down the corridor and says, "That way, son." When he arrives at the cardiac arrest, the face of the patient looks familiar. It is the face of the patient that showed him the way. Now, I'm not saying I believe in ghosts, but that's the only local ghost story I know. From my earliest memories, my parents used to say I would kick my blankets off in my sleep. No one ever actually saw me doing this though. When I slept in the same bed as my parents, this never occurred. This is significant, because I used to experience some form of invisible entity, for lack of better word. I'd hear footsteps, see my door handle go down, often feel this thing standing on my bed and my duvet pulling tight. Imagine someone standing on your bed. I had all the experiences of sound and sight and pressure you'd experience, but nothing to be seen. My duvet used to be gently pulled off me by some invisible entity. I'd told my parents, and they thought it was just nightmares. This went on for years and years, about once or twice a month. One night it happened, and I screamed out, as I often did, and my dad came running in. As he turned on the light, we both saw my Lego bucket get kicked across the room. No pets in the room. This was about 3 m from either of us. The bucket was sat on the floor, under a small coffee table. The Lego went flying and scattered across the floor. We were both freaked out, and my dad to this day still talks about how impossible that situation was for it to be anything other than a smoke kind of poltergeist. I was about 11 at the time, so not super young even. I've had many more experiences, but this one was the most unique because of two independent people having the same experience and actually seeing the impact of it scattering my Lego. I've got no answers. I would put it down to sleep paralysis, but that doesn't explain things moving. Not the most exciting story, but when my mum was in her early teens, one of her best friends lived in an incredibly old house that was reputed to have been somehow associated with a monastery hundreds of years ago when it was first built. Apparently the friend had a few ghost stories about the place, none of which I can remember now unfortunately. One day my mum was at her friend's house, and they decided to take a photo together at the bottom of the stairs, for whatever reason, the early 1970s equivalent of a selfie, I suppose. Of course, it was a few weeks before the photos got developed, but when this particular photo came back there was a dark shadow in the photo that looked remarkably like a monk in a hood stood looming behind the two girls with an arm outstretched towards them. It wasn't to do with the lighting or the shadow of any object. Honestly, it was probably just an error in the photo printing process or something, but it was a weird coincidence, and apparently there were no issues in the rest of that album of photos. I remember seeing the photo myself as a child, but weirdly I never found it when I inherited all my mum's old photos after she died and sorted through all her belongings. Otherwise, I'd post it. Sounds like a good cop-out, I know, but genuinely true. She was quite proud of it, so I can't think where it could have gone. When I was 7 or 8 we went on a field studies trip to an old country house called Juniper Hall outside of Dorking in Surrey. It's got quite a lot of history surrounding it, from bodies being found during works to housing Canadian soldiers during WW2. One night when everyone was in bed I had a strange feeling that something was remarkably close to me. I woke up to see an apparition of a man sitting at the end of my bed. I quite rightly shit myself and hid under the covers for what felt like an eternity, but in reality must have been a minute or so. When I looked again it was gone and there was nobody there. This was in the middle of the night and everyone else was asleep. I can think of no other explanation for that experience other than it being paranormal. I'm 35 now and I can still see that image in my head and replay the whole experience like it happened yesterday. My ex told me that her nana, who passed away when she was only young, often came to see her grandchildren, and it turned out, also her great-grandchildren. I was skeptical, at first. We had a few encounters, with one or two that could be passed off as simply odd occurrences. The babies would always look up over our shoulders like they were looking at someone. We were babysitting her niece, 5 months old, who was sleeping in her sister's bedroom while she went out, and we both clearly heard a woman's voice say her sister's name on the baby monitor, only us two and the baby in the house. Also, the ex heard someone call out to her when we were living together and she heard footsteps coming down the stairs, but she was alone in the house. The main one that got me and changed my way of thinking was with my daughter. We sat in our front room and our daughter was playing with her toys in the hallway. She came running in and grabbed her mum, saying she didn't like the old lady, and could we make her go away. She was about 3 to 4 at the time. We looked down the hall, no one there, and asked her what lady, and she replied, the old lady in there, and pointed to the hall. It really did freak us out a bit. I read up and found that something that said that family members sometimes visit younger children to make sure they are safe, and the best way to stop it was to reassure them. Literally by speaking to them. So, Muggings here had to stand in the kitchen and speak loudly to the spirit to reassure it that I would take proper care of my daughter, and to please leave her alone as she was getting scared. We had nothing after that. It wasn't scary as such, more comforting. I know a lot of people won't believe me, but this is what happened. Me and my brother grew up in Essex with our mum. As far as we knew, we didn't have any other siblings. My mum died when me and my brother were in our late teens, and we found out from our nan on the day that our mum died that we actually had 2 older sisters living in Scotland, where my mum was originally from. It took us a year to find our sisters online, and eventually one of my sisters came down to stay for a few days to see where her mum lived, and that she ended up staying in my mum's old room whilst I shared my brother's room. One night whilst she was staying with us, I woke up during the night to get a drink of water. I kept a glass next to my bed. I looked over towards where my brother is sleeping and saw my mum's ghost sat on my brother's bed looking at him. She turned around and saw that I noticed her and gave an "oh shit, I've been caught" smile, then disappeared. If it was a random ghost I saw, I'd have shat myself, but because it was my mum and she gave me a cheeky smile, it was really comforting. In a way, it made me a lot less scared of dying. I told my brother and sister what happened the next day and they were really freaked out about it. My brother didn't believe me because of how calm I was. A few years later, my brother and his fiancée went to a spiritualist night, and my mum apparently came through to the woman hosting the night and told my brother that my mum said that she had made herself seen and the person that saw her needs a massive kick up the eyes, which I did at the time, to be fair. Entered an empty manor house, 400-odd years old, walk down a hallway learning the place, pass a study and see a desk with swivel chair pushed in. Walk to the end, hear a knock, walk back, look into the study and the desk is facing 90 degrees now, facing the door. Sat in my front room, speaking to my mum on the phone. Suddenly see in my peripheral vision a guy in jeans and a bomber jacket walk through my door to the entrance hallway. Shit myself, brain goes into overdrive, tell my mum. She tells me it's the 8-year anniversary since the death of my uncle who fit that exact description. When I was about 10-11 years old, moved into an older house with my bedroom on the back left of the top floor, and my sister's bedroom at the back right of the top floor. Can't sleep, look toward sister's room across the landing, see a thin old lady gliding from my parents' room into my sister's room. Bricked it, hid under the covers, sister screams 30 seconds later and wakes up crying. Parents rush in and sister says she feels sick and really cold. Taking my washing to the tumble dryer in the garage, turn on the light that flicks a few times, look up and my granddad is standing there smiling at me at the end of the garage, but only saw him between the flashes. Light comes on, he's not there. My granddad rarely ate in the last weeks before he died, only thing he loved was Kinder Buenos of all things. Used all my pocket money to buy him a box from the local convenience store. Anyway, a couple of years after I was feeling really down about something and suddenly smelled Kinder Bueno. Felt like he was there, said his granddad, and heard a knock on the kitchen door. Got a few others, but you all likely not read them, haha. I live in a 200 years old house. I spend a lot of time in the garden. When we first moved in, I'd be working in the garden, and then just on the edge of my field of vision I'd think I saw someone, so I'd look up and there would be no one there. This happened a lot, still happens, in fact, to the point I almost don't bother looking now. It's always the same blackish shape, just the hint of a figure. Anyway, a while back I joined a local history group on Facebook. People just post old pictures of the local area mostly. One day someone posts a picture of my house from about 1880 and their front and center is a woman dressed all in black. I swear it's her I'm seeing. I can't explain it. I haven't even told my wife this. Anyway, it's not creepy, it's just like someone is taking an interest in what I'm doing. My mum passed away a few months before my wedding. I was gutted she couldn't be there. Bit on my wedding night, had some fun in the jacuzzi, winking face laid on the bed to settle for the night. The room was absolutely feck steaming hot, so I was laid starkers with no sheets. Mrs. was asleep. Something tickled my foot just as I was dozing off. I bloody hate my feet being tickled. Mum always used to do it to wind me up. It actually made me jump, absolutely not my imagination. A few months later I got a medium reading. My mum came through. I asked him to ask if she knew anything about that. He said she was laughing hysterically. That kind of confirmed it was her. When I was younger I used to go to a Christian camp in North Wales, and the field we camped on had a bit of a ghost story. One night at this camp during the 90s, this was before my time, this is very much a second-hand account, a couple of girls were walking back from the toilets and they saw the apparition of a white lady walking across the field. It started on top of a hill on one side and disappeared into some bushes on the other. Whilst this white lady has never been seen since, as far as I'm aware, there was an incident one of the years I went to this camp. A large group of us were walking back from the beach and some of the people in front of me claimed that they saw a figure dressed in white standing on the path. They thought it was someone messing around at first, but this figure disappeared quite quickly from view, and they weren't able to find it. I've been to the ancient Ram Inn on a ghost hunt fairly recently, which was pretty creepy. I went in quite skeptical, and it was clear some stuff was done for the sake of entertainment, but we had some genuine feeling experiences. The first experience was involving a mirror seance thing. Hopefully someone can provide the correct term as I don't know. Anyway, my face morphed into a bloodied young-looking WW2 pilot. There are no stories of anything pilot-related in that building as far as the owner knew, and I know the mirror thing is apparently science and the brain. But the weird part was that I've been interested in aircraft and war since I could walk essentially, and I've always wanted to be a pilot, so I thought maybe someone from my past life was visiting me. I was also stood quite a way away from someone else who was doing the mirror thing, and I noticed their face morph in front of my very eyes to a thing that looked like Valak, the creepy demon nun. This was before I even knew of that movie's existence. My family member also had her hair pulled in the same building, and a friend was suddenly filled with so much emotion that they had to leave the room in a fit of tears. Perfectly fine literally seconds before that. Had a moment when we were sitting in the barn. A relative for some reason said Lucifer, and the second they said that a big bang and scuffling came from one of the furthest rooms in the pub. Bearing in mind everybody that's in the building is sat in this one room. My sister told me this and she swears it's true even years later. When I was a baby we lived in a council house, and when we moved in there was a stain on the stairs. Apparently the couple that lived there before had a lot of domestic abuse, and the man had pushed his girlfriend down the stairs, leaving bloodstains. My sister didn't know this at the time, she would have been 5, but said that one night she woke up and felt someone sitting on the bed. She opened her eyes a bit and saw a lady just staring at her. She was terrified and put her covers over her head until she fell asleep. Years later when we had moved somewhere else she told my mum, and my mum mentioned that the lady who lived there before had died after falling down the stairs. Not me, but a friend of mine has too. His grandmother died unexpectedly in her sleep one night, so his dad and aunt went round as soon as they were told in order to begin sorting things out. Closing up at 6 p.m., they set the burglar alarm, which started malfunctioning as soon as they had walked away from the front door and couldn't be silenced. That was the first time that had ever happened in the 15 years grandmother had been there, and the emergency alarm bloke silenced it but couldn't explain why it had gone wrong. Also, his dog was put to sleep the following year. He couldn't face it, so stayed at home while his parents went to the vet. At the exact moment his dog passed away there was a momentary blip in the power to his house, and there was a thud from the cupboard where a lot of the dog's stuff was stored. This happened to me a couple of years ago. I had just got back from the cinema and had watched Halloween or some similar slasher. I was living in my parents' house, and my dad has one of those big stack stereos, with the vinyl on top, cassette player, radio etc. in the dining room. I walked across the dining room to retrieve something from the other side, and as I walked past the stereo it turned on, full blast and distorted. It scared the living shit out of me. I didn't even know how to turn this thing off, so I was just scrambling pressing every button to try shut the thing up and not wake the house up. I got it turned off, ran upstairs, and hid under my covers. I was so thankful that I had not just seen a supernatural film at the cinema. Nothing crazy, but when I was a kid I used to see a man standing in the same corner of the room almost every night. He would just stand there in old-fashioned clothing looking at me, not speaking or moving, just looking. Of course, I screamed the house down terrified as a kid, but given that my family were also there when I was awake and seeing this figure, kind of confirms it wasn't a dream. I'm not necessarily a believer in the paranormal, but I don't really know what to think. I can still see the man now in my head. Years on, my sister recently asked about it and my description matched what I told her 20+ years ago as well. Creepy. I was in Northern Ireland in November with my girlfriend and 4 friends. We hiked along the cliffs to a pub, and the final stretch back to the car was a long beach, very dark by this point. It was very windy and rainy, but we were several Guinness deep. We split up into groups of 2 as we changed pace naturally along this long beach. Me and my girlfriend were in the middle with mates a fair distance in front. We kept hearing someone whistling at us from in front of us, getting louder and louder, but we could barely see anything a few meters away, let alone them. The whistling sounded like someone trying to get our attention, but we never got closer to it. We finally got to our mates and were like, "Hell yes, we're coming, what do you want?" They didn't know what we were talking about and couldn't hear the whistling. When I was about 13 living at my parents', I was home alone gaming in my room. Was about 8 at night I think. After a while I noticed my door was open in my room, so I went and shut it. It has already been closed. It then opened again after about 5 minutes, so I closed it again. It then opened almost immediately and swung wide open. Now scared shitless I closed the door and leant against it. Was then pushed open and threw me to the ground, and again swung open. I then closed the door and sat against it, phoned my parents and waited till they got home. The door was a wooden door with a latch and lock. Originally my parents put it up to a draft, but all the windows were closed and even when opened they couldn't cause the door to open. To this day I'm certain it was some sort of paranormal type event. We'd had a few other things happen in the house and another in my room which we just can't explain, which I was apparently there for but can't remember any of it. Also, we discovered that the first person to die in WW1 from our area used to live in my room. When I was around 12 to 13 I had a kid's metal detector that ran on batteries. At some point my friend left it switched on and the batteries died, so I just left it in a metal storage bin I had in my room. One night I was in bed, and I started to hear a buzz sound slowly getting louder and louder. When I looked at the light that indicates the metal detector was switched on was lit and it was going mad due to being in the metal bin. I knew the batteries were completely dead as I had tested them. Another time I had a WCW Goldberg toy like this. To make him start telling you had to squeeze his hand and he would start talking. In another analogous situation he just started talking on his own, which really freaked me out. The only reason I think it could be ghost related is because our neighbor claimed she could communicate with spirits and had a ghost in her house that moved things, so maybe it just got bored and came into outhouse lol. Went on a mad weekend away at my friend Johnny's parents' new property. It was an old B&B they were doing up with the intention of retiring with it, and they said Johnny could have a few friends to it to test the place out before they opened properly. It was awesome when you're 17/18, big old downstairs bar/dining bit, games room, loads of rooms to explore, hide, and seek drunk etc. We are having a great time when we run out of booze, and one of our friends, Alex, volunteers to go to the cellar behind the bar and get some more wine/whiskey/beer whatever. Johnny's parents said we could drink what we want and pay them after jointly, as long as we didn't take too much. Alex goes off to the cellar but comes back quite quickly without alcohol, looking pale and frazzled. He asks Johnny if there are any other guests in the hotel at the minute, or if his parents had come by. Johnny says no, they're in London this weekend staying with his brother, and there aren't any other guests because the hotel is not open yet. Alex starts to freak out a bit and says that when he was going down to the cellar, he had to go down some steps and then along a tiny corridor to the door. As he walked into the stairs part, he looked down the corridor and saw the back of a man's head wearing what looked like a big brown hoodie with the hood pulled up. This man turned left at the door and disappeared round a corner. Alex had figured at the corner was the edge of another corridor elsewhere, but when he got to the door and the corner, it was just a small alcove just big enough for someone to fit in. And yep, you guessed it, no one there. People try to calm Alex down, saying he had been drinking, he had smoked, he was high, maybe he just imagined it, and the guys go to check the house just in case it was a teleporting intruder. Nothing. We conclude has either tripping, or made it up, and go back through. Alex still creeped out though and made his GF stay up all night on the couch watching TV until they fell asleep. The rest of us went to bed fine and all was normal. Next day, we go to the little village and look for things to do at the info point. Alex suddenly grabs an opening leaflet for the B&B and goes pale again reading it. He reads out how the B&B is built on the site of an old monastery, and the monks slept in the downstairs room and cellar bit that we were in. Alex is convinced he saw the ghost of a monk that day and didn't hang around to find out. Him and the girlfriend left early and went home, and we kind of didn't see him much after that. Very weird and coincidental. As far as we know, Johnny didn't even know this, so how could Alex? When I was young I was told 3 spirits followed me everywhere, as well as knowing that the reason I had horrible dreams of death is because spirits would come to me and show me how they died. The worst of it was when I lived in this one house in my hometown that drew the line of my fears. I lived in this house for about 3 years. I lived on the first floor while my 2 sisters lived on the second and my mom was in the basement, for context. I also had a dog at the time as well who would sleep in my room since I let him sleep on the bed. After about a year my sister was going to head off to college, so my mom decided to have us swap rooms. The day before we swapped I had a dream, all of this is in the dream, where I woke up in my bed and a tiny chair was on my chest knocked over. I didn't think much of it other than that was weird. I threw it off and called my dog to the bed and went back to sleep. I woke up again in the dream and the chair was back on my chest, but this time the chair floated upwards and then into the wall in an odd quick movement. This scared me awake. When I went to move to my sister's room I asked my sisters to salt the door and window, which they did. Nothing really happened, but I was still anxious and got horrible vibes from the room. A week before we moved out of the house I had a dream that a short man hopped on my bed and started choking me, however other than just waking up I was stuck there being choked. It wasn't just in the dream though, I felt choked in real life as well and couldn't breathe. After about 5 minutes of me not breathing and just telling myself if I can just open my eyes I can get out of this. I managed to open my eyes and it stopped. I slept in my other sister's room the whole week before we moved. I still get horrible dreams of death and dying, but since then I haven't been anxious all the time like I used to. However, I started getting sleep anxiety. When I was young my grandmother told me she could see angels and demons. The angels are the white floating shadows on the ceiling and the black shadows crawling on the floor were demons. I told her I thought it was a gift from God, but she said she didn't want it because it scared her too much. When I became a teenager I made friends with the boy next door. I used to go over there and talk to him about God because he was a non-believer, but he liked talking to me. I eventually moved away, and I heard he got in an argument with his dad and killed himself. Not long after that I was at a friend's house playing tag in the dark in her basement/garage. There was a hallway that separated the two that had a window. I was in the basement part, and she was apparently in the garage part. As I was heading to the hallway, in front of the window, was the unmistakable form of the boy next door, solid black, and I couldn't even see through it. Scared me. He visited me a few times till I had enough and told him that I miss him, but he has to move on because he is scaring me. Never saw him again. Now my next story, I don't really know if it happened or if it was a dream, but it felt very real. I was sleeping when I woke up to a woman on the floor on her hands and feet, yes feet not knees, started crawling to me and I couldn't move, only my eyes. However, after my experience with the boy next door I educated myself in paranormal, and this experience was different. I wasn't afraid, I was pissed. But since I couldn't speak I knew she could hear what I was saying in my head, so I just kept repeating hurt you over and over with increased anger but also with authority. She gets all the way to my side of the bed when I said it one more time with far more energy and was able to move again and she disappeared. Never saw her again. The only experience that I cannot really explain happened to me in Budapest in 2020, at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. I was stuck in a hotel when COVID happened, actually 2 months sick with COVID myself. I couldn't leave because they closed the borders, so I was stuck in Hungary for a while. My only option was to rent a flat because all the hotels were being closed, but I found one that was going to stay open for another 10 days, so I went there while I was looking for a flat. I was still quite weak from the COVID, probably still sick even, and for the first week in the hotel I was quite ill, but still even in my clearly altered state I cannot explain what happened. When I moved in, it was only me and one other guy in the nearby room, in a huge hotel of 200 plus rooms. I must say it was a modern hotel, built in 2011 I think, but in the city center. The guy was also staying for a week, I was told. On the third night of my stay, I was awakened at around 3:20 by some really loud banging from the ceiling, like someone was hammering heavy furniture in the apartment right above. It was rhythmic but not too much, really loud, and like, angry. It went on for around an hour, making sleep impossible. I dismissed it as some kind of work. I was really angry. Why should they assemble furniture in the middle of the night? The morning after I went to ask the concierge, but the day staff said they didn't know anything, and they laughed when I suggested night work. Coincidentally, the guy in the next room had left in the morning. I could barely stand on my feet, and I had nowhere to go, so I just stayed. The following night again I was awakened, a bit later like 3:40, and the infernal ruckus went on until almost 5 a.m. This time I was really scared. Thankfully I didn't even think of ghosts at the time. My guesses were, the hotel staff wanted to close but I had paid in advance, so they were trying to scare me to make me leave, but to bang constantly without a pause for 1.5 hours? Then I thought of pipes. I dismissed that immediately. The noise was some clear intentional banging. I imagined that maybe there was something illegal going on, like packing contraband. I was a bit confused by the weakness. I considered only for a second to go out of the room across the dark empty hotel to see what was happening, but the mere idea filled me with terror. I barricaded myself in the room and just waited it out. The noise stopped again after around 1 hour. The following night, again. My new guess was that one of the night staff had a secret, deeply passionate lover and they were making violent right above my head, so that the bed would bang on the floor, but well, it didn't seem reasonable. Also, 1 hour and a half each time. The fourth night there was no noise, but the fifth and the sixth again. Last night again no noise, and then I could finally leave. I didn't think about it for years, until some months ago I watched for the first time the ghost film The Changeling, which is supposed to be inspired by a true story that happened to the director. When I heard the banging that occurs in the haunted house, my hair literally stood on my head, because in the hotel I heard exactly the same kind of noise. Now if someone can explain to me what can make that noise every night between around 3 and 5, I am attentive. I actually stayed again in the hotel after it reopened and it was filled with people, zero problems, but I was so ill in 2020 that I absolutely couldn't remember which room I was in, to visit the room above. Maybe there is a reasonable explanation for what happened, but I can't find it. I didn't imagine that noise. I actually spent a couple of those nights on the phone with my mother, completely scared, and she could hear it too. I remember as a kid I used to see this monkey-like thing near my bedroom door in the flat I used to live in. One night when my dad was on night shift I heard this growling sound that didn't stop until he came home, and in my teen I was pushed in the bathroom into the bathroom door. That happened twice that I heard sound of my dead hamster wheel turning at night. I heard my dead dog coming up the stairs in the house I live in now, and my cats I've also heard. Okay, so one day I went to the Queen Mary boat. We had a tour, so we paid a lot of money to be there, so they took us to the pool. Like that shit is hella cool but haunted, and like there is this girl Jackie, and I had like goosebumps, but I wasn't scared around the whole ship till we got to the room. Tot was haunted by Bloody Mary, so like we did the Estic method. He said go to the closet like the doors shut and wouldn't open. But like I was scared and I literally was so stupid as fuck to go to the bathroom, turn of the lights and say Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. The lights flickered. I was terrified by what I saw. My spine crumbled. I have two. One, was trying to sleep one night, and I heard my brother calling my name from the other side of the room. He was spending the night at a friend's house. 2. Stepmom and I were part of a ghost tour at the Crescent Hotel in Eureka Springs. I took a picture of a hallway with a mirror on the wall at the end. Under the mirror were 3 white dots. Some people believe that spirits can look like / move around as orbs of light, lined up almost perfectly under the mirror. The lighting in the hallway was dim. There was no glare coming from the mirror. It was the best picture I had taken that night. I don't have the picture anymore.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.